Hey, Jabbers. On today's episode, we're chatting all about shiny object syndrome. You might be wondering, what the heck is that? Shiny object syndrome is when someone's distracted by something new and exciting, often at the expense of what they're currently doing. And I am raising my hand here. I'm absolutely guilty in this. In business, this can manifest as chasing the latest industry strategy, tactic, or advice. This can be a common pitfall for entrepreneurs like ourselves, especially for those that are super creative, like our brains are kind of all over the place. So for us, this looks like new business ideas, new ways to market our brand, and new website or branding, and the list goes on and on. So let's dive into how we manage this and make sure we don't get sucked into it all.
Oh my gosh, this is such an interesting topic. I honestly had to Google shiny object syndrome because I was like, what's the actual definition of this? And I love that it's SOS because it kind of feels like a cry for help.
Does.
So, I mean, I know you kind of defined shiny object syndrome. So, Gabby, tell us a little bit. I know we were talking a little bit before we started recording. This is something that you're definitely affected by. So, tell us how you see this kind of prevalent in your life, your business right now.
Yeah, so poor Kari gets the consequences of my shiny object syndrome all the time, as well as my business partner, Jessica. Basically, for me, I am the chaser of all the new flashy trends and stuff. Like threads happened last year, I'm on it. I'm using it. But then what falls to the wayside, Instagram and Facebook and all these other things that need the consistency and need the long-term work put into it, I'm onto the new thing. So poor Carrie, I literally told her today, I was like, I think we need to change our branding. I think we need new colors. So it's could it be ADHD? Yes, it could.
Undiagnosed. Yeah.
Undiagnosed. But I do think it's also, and you can tell me what you think about this, but I also think it's like our attention span, it has changed so drastically because of our technology and instant gratification and all that kind of stuff. And I think we're always chasing that, diagnosed with something or not. I just think it's the nature of our generation. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's kind of the dopamine hit, right? When we talk about text messages or having alerts on our phone. And I mean, I often am like, okay, I need to look something up. And I go to Instagram, whether it's like to find someone's name or like an email or whatever. And then I totally forget why I went on Instagram in the first place. So I feel like even something like that is really, you're kind of like, oh, what's this person talking about? Or what event did they do? Oh, that's a fun design. Um, and so yeah, I think we are easily distracted as a generation with technology. And I think especially, I mean, back when we started our businesses, right? Like Instagram was kind of new. It was still those old filters. It was like, had a great lunch today at this cafe. And it was like a photo with a horrible filter of my food.
Yes.
Um, but I think now we're so inundated with like messages and new business ideas and how to improve your business that it is overwhelming. Because I think for me, I'm constantly like, oh my God, that's such a great idea. Oh, wait, I'm not doing that for my business. So then my wheels are always turning of like new business ideas and things that I should be working on. And it's overwhelming for sure.
That's what I was going to ask you next. I think it's all also an issue of like I'll do the shiny object thing where I'm like, okay, let me try this new technique or this new idea. But then all of a sudden, I am stopped dead in my tracks and I am so overwhelmed. I'm
Mhm.
like, okay, this new thing requires 10 steps. My old thing requires 8 steps. My other old thing. And now it's a combination of I've just put so much on my plate and I end up doing nothing. Like
Yeah.
I'm just paralyzed with just overwhelm. And have you found yourself in that situation and kind of how do you get out of it? Or like, are you able to talk yourself off the ledge and say, okay, actually, you don't need this?
No. I wish I could like talk myself off the ledge. I think I definitely am learning how to reevaluate where I'm at and like goals that I put down and things that I think right now, especially, I'm like, I just have like zero energy. I was telling you earlier. And so I'm also kind of in a phase where like I don't really care.
Yeah.
I just like want to get to the end of this pregnancy
Yeah.
and like focusing on my health. But I really think like sometimes I do have a ton of things on my plate, right? And then I'm looking at everything and I'm just like, okay, what is actually going to help my business? What is something that I can focus on maybe in a couple of months from now instead of doing it right now? Because, for example, I really wanted to like redo my website, kind of like change the branding a little bit and just like have a much cleaner website and kind of like take off a lot of the overwhelm of it of just like downloads and all of these things that maybe like customers feel overwhelmed by. And I just haven't had the time to do it. And so I'm like, you know what? Maybe that's something I'll work on this fall and just like get it ready for later in the year, booking season, the new year again. But yeah, I do have to take a step back every now and then and really evaluate where am I at? What do I actually have time for? And what's really important? Like, yeah, that new business idea is great, but like what is kind of helping my current business and kind of moving the needle forward on that.
Well, and like you
But
said, like looking back at the data too, like if you're talking about marketing for your business and there's this new strategy or new program, what is actually, where are your clients coming from? Are they word of mouth referral? Well, then maybe going on threads doesn't make sense. Or is it Instagram? Then maybe threads, it could be a good combination. Looking back and to your point, what's working or what is something that I can test later on or entirely push off.
yeah. I mean, do you feel like you have a good system for reevaluating what what you keep on your to-do list and what you don't?
No. Um,
Or I
I
guess in addition to that, do you feel like Jess helps balance that out?
no, because we fuel each other. So if
Like
Jess is
fuel on the
listening,
fire. It's like, yes,
yes.
let's do it.
Okay, that's no, but that's a great point because we've talked about teams before, and I know in future episodes we'll talk about it even more in depth, but I said in a previous episode that I always recommend hiring people that are better than yourself, right? But with that, sometimes comes a lot of similarities because you're both very creative or you're both whatever it is. And Jess and I both have some version of shiny object syndrome. I think she would say mine is definitely more accentuated than hers. But regardless, we fuel each other. We're like, okay, I had this idea, and we voice text. We'll be in the car. I'm like, hey Siri, tell Jess I had this idea, and blah blah blah, and she'll reply, oh. Yes. Okay. I also think I could add on, this idea to your idea. And so next thing you know, we're this snowball effect is happening, and it's an avalanche at that
Right.
point. And but I'll be honest, I would say 90% of the times we don't take action on these
Mm.
ideas.
Oh, interesting.
And
Yeah.
so maybe that's something else to talk about of like I think there's something so fun about coming up with ideas, but
Mhm.
do you take action on it and it's that you're not consistent with them, or do you just think of stuff but don't even start it?
For me, I guess it's a little bit of both because I have done stuff in the past, which I also think maybe this is twofold, right? Like I implement something and then it doesn't get a good return. Like
Mhm.
people aren't really like buying it or it's like kind of flops. And then I get scared and I don't promote it and I'm just kind of like, "Oh my God, that's so embarrassing."
Yeah.
I'm just going to like leave it and not really talk about it or touch it and then eventually like take it down. Like I did that with my print shop because I've done photography for a long time and then it just kind of felt overwhelming and I was like I don't know how to merge the two of these things together with wedding planning and it felt like I was overwhelming people and
Mhm.
who knows if I really was. It just felt like I was feeling that um and yeah, I'm like I put all this work in, didn't really market it and then eventually took it down because I was like I don't know if I like want to do this right now. And so there's definitely some stuff that I bring to fruition, but then get scared once it's out there because there's not, I mean, I don't have like a million followers, right? There's not like this huge interest in stuff right away. And so I think sometimes maybe we get scared because we think it has failed because there's not like 20 people buying something every day, right? But then there are some things where I've had a lot of other ideas and they've stayed on my to-do list, or like
Yeah.
maybe I've worked on them a little bit, which was what I was going to ask you, like how far do you feel like you and Jess get, or is it always just like conversation versus like, oh, we made it like 80% in and then it just kind of like fell to the side?
Okay, it depends. Like, actually, this is a great example. This morning, Jess and I had a Zoom meeting because we basically want to revamp our email sequence for a freebie that we have on our wedding planning page. And it's a budget download freebie that does really well. Like right now we have maybe 800 some subscribers that have downloaded over the last few
Yeah.
years. And but I was telling her, I said, they're not converting. Like the people are downloading it, but what the heck? They're not turning into clients. So we got to reevaluate that. And so we know each other well, that we are so great at coming up with new ideas on how to do this, but we don't always take action. So during our meeting, we immediately scheduled our next meeting to talk about the next step. So basically, we gave ourselves some homework today. And we said, great, by next meeting, we need to have this done. And we work really well with checklist, but we're enablers. So one of us
Mm.
has to set the checklist, probably, and then hold each other accountable, and then put a meeting, like a deadline where we're like, hey, we're going to talk about it next Thursday. Let's make sure we did our to dos. So that has worked really, really well. I think the other thing is when the task is too grand, when it's not broken up in small enough pieces, that to me is super overwhelming. I love thinking about the big picture and the big vision for the idea, but then I get really overwhelmed and scared with how to break it into, manageable
Yeah.
pieces and to check things off and slowly chip away at it?
Well, it's great to have a partner to like keep you accountable, because when it is just yourself, you're like, well, I'll do that in October or whatever it is. I mean, even for this podcast, right? It's like we keep each other accountable on like posting on Instagram and newsletter and like branding and coming up with episode outlines and things like that. And I just even think about getting it off the ground when we initially started talking about it, and really kind of keeping each other like, okay, let's have this meeting, let's do this, let's get it out there. We want to launch. Here's our date. Which I think really kept us on track, where we could have been like, yeah, this sounds like a great idea for us to make money eventually someday, you know?
Not now.
Okay, we've had some
We
sponsorships.
Yes. Yes, and I was gonna say that could be a fun episode in the future, like, if any listeners are curious, just a peek maybe towards the end of the year, a peek inside the podcast and what
Hmm.
we've been able to do, what we've made, what we spent, and so on. But that's a great point, Carrie, because I will say you are more fear aware in the sense that something it will stop you like your print shop. If it doesn't instantly bring the mass purchases that you maybe had hoped for, you're more affected by that. I'm not so much affected by it, but I'm not good at consistency. And not
Mm,
necessarily because of fear, but because I'm bored
right.
or I'm not getting the instant gratification and I'm like, I don't know, next thing.
Yeah.
So either either way, there is something to be said about the shiny object syndrome and the lack of consistency. So if we think about that way, what would you say are some tips or ideas that we're just thinking about now that could keep us more consistent?
I think reevaluating like your to-do list, right? Kind of figuring out, maybe it is a brain dump, right? It's like, okay, here's all the ideas that I have for my business, for my life, for the other businesses I want to start. And then kind of figuring out like what is most important to be done, whether it's in your current business or even if you're like, I'm kind of wanting to transition into something else. And I think it's sort of like laying out what's real, like being really honest with yourself, right? Of like what is realistic. Because even like a month ago, I was like, I can totally do this new website before I have this baby. Like,
Famous
like
last words.
yeah, and now like we ended up moving and it's been chaotic and I'm really exhausted and like have like a few health things that I'm watching out for and it's like I just don't have the energy. And so now I'm like I'm trying to be more gentle with myself too, right? Of like, okay, it is what it is. Like I just need to keep the things that are top priority to keep my business running and my current clients happy. And so I think it's really just being honest with yourself and making a list and but being realistic, right? Not being like, I'm totally gonna open up that coffee shop by the end of December.
My God. Yeah.
You know, and I think just yeah, I think being honest with yourself and being like, it is a great idea, but like
Mhm.
maybe that happens in Q1 of 2025 when you have more bandwidth and it's, off season, stuff like that.
Yeah. I've been listening to a lot of podcasts recently, actually, and consistency, if you ask me what my word of the year is, it's always consistency. It's been I'm consistent with my
Yeah.
I am consistent with my word of the year. Because it's my greatest pitfall, my greatest challenge. Um, and and I will say, I think, listening to these podcasts, hearing from other people, other entrepreneurs, consistency seems to be the trick to break into success
Mhm.
in pretty much anything. You can be it can be a crappy first draft of something or a post or an episode or whatever it is you're working on, but the more people are consistent, I think it means that the audience feels like, "Oh, they're reliable. They're always showing up no matter what. They're consistent with it. We can always count on them." And I think there's a lot to be said with that just because of the nature of this new era of shiny object syndrome. A lot of
Yeah.
people are showing up and piecing out because they're on to the next thing. And it's like our audience can't figure out what we're doing and where we are and all that. So I think the moral of the story with that piece is just is just consistency is important and not necessarily to let the fear take over if you still think it's a valuable project or goal that you want to tackle, like to your point, Carrie. If it's something that's just in general overwhelming or doesn't align with where you want to go with your personal brand or your business, it's okay to get rid of it. But if it is something that you enjoy, you're confident that you can create content for it or whatever it is, just be consistent and show up. I mean, I hope one day we look back at these podcasts of our first year and we just have a hilarious time over a bottle of wine and say, "Do you remember that time we rambled about shiny object syndrome?"
Made no sense. Yeah, I mean, I think just, the fear for me especially is like, I I think as I've gotten older and just, trends change with like social media, I'm just even more fearful of like showing my face on camera because I'm like, I just feel weird and I don't want to do it. And I maybe that's really good though, Gabby, because I feel like I'm more fearful and you're like, whatever, if no one likes the story or looks at it, I don't really care. And I'm like devastated by it. So maybe that's why we're a good team. Like you
Yeah,
show
I
up
think
on
so.
stories and but yeah, I think though it's interesting because I think kind of going back to, this is definitely more detrimental for people that are creative, right? And so which I think both of us are very creative people, especially the industry that we're in and having to design weddings and all of that stuff. And so I'm curious how you think that like this affects you a little bit more because you are creative. Because if you were a little bit more I mean, I don't know, if it's safe to say like more logical, would
Mhm.
it be less detrimental to you as like an entrepreneur, right? Because you're like, nope, that's a great idea, but that's just not realistic for, return on investment, all this kind of stuff. So I'm curious
Mhm.
what your thought is on that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could see it if someone was very shiny object syndrome in a corporate setting, like where they have a W-2 job or they have a boss and they have a list of tasks to do. I'm sure that position is more organized and a little more rigid. And so welcoming in a way, the shiny object syndrome could bring in a little bit of extra brainstorming and creativity to the position, but you still have these guidelines you have to follow that reel you back in, right?
Mhm.
Whereas as creatives and especially creative entrepreneurs where we have no boss, nobody to tell us what to do, we're just off, we're gone. We're off out gallivanting, as my husband would say,
Mhm.
gallivanting in our minds about all sorts of things. In one way, super positive, allows us for no ceiling of creativity, just idea brainstorming forever and ever, and nobody to tell us otherwise or to tell us no. And that's how some of the best businesses were created in our lifetime, like it's just someone had to think about a computer. Who thinks about that? The internet. I mean,
Mhm.
I could go on. Don't even get me started on how planes fly. My brain can't. And so, but people had to think about that kind of stuff in some weird, wacky way that was not seen as normal to the regular public. So that is a huge benefit. At the same time, we don't have boundaries, or if you are a solopreneur and you don't have a team to counterbalance your shininess, like, yeah, you have to be self-aware enough to bring yourself back and reel yourself back in. Perhaps a business coach is somebody that comes in and helps with that, or an accountability partner in a Facebook group, right? Like
Yep.
if that's the challenge of just getting things checked off the list. Um, but yeah, that's kind of my thought on if someone was more, I guess, left brain is more creative, right? And right brain is
I
more
think so. I believe so. Now I feel like I need to Google this.
fact check.
Fact check. Sorry if it's the other way around. Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a great piece of advice with if you are a solo entrepreneur, like find an accountability partner, whether it's in a group or just like a fellow colleague who is like, the same industry as you. Because I think even for us, right, it's like, okay, maybe finding another wedding planner who I can talk through kind of all of my ideas or how they're operating. And it's great just to kind of get that, like, so what do you think of this idea? And
Mhm.
like for people to kind of play devil's advocate and be like, okay, ask all these questions just to make sure it aligns with your goals and like what you really want to do. Because I
Yeah.
think with shiny object syndrome, right, it's sort of like the grass is always greener. It's like, oh, if I
Yes.
make this thing or sell this item or revamp this, maybe things will be better and more inquiries, more clients, or whatever it is. Um, and again, it's like going back to like what's realistic and what's manageable and achievable within the time frame that you want. Right? Because like some of these things, like we think of them in the off season because we're slower.
Mhm.
But it also happens when we're super busy. I'm like, oh, it would be great to add this to my offering. But then I'm just like, I have no time to do that right now because you like don't want to disappoint clients. So it's like a balance of like taking care of your clients, but then also doing back end business things. So
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know. I think an accountability partner is a great idea if you can't keep yourself in a realistic, like in the reality and being honest with yourself.
Right, and making sure that accountability partner is someone you trust to give you honest feedback, because to your point,
Yeah.
like, you wanna make sure someone can tell you, "Hey, I don't know if that's a good idea, and here's why," or, "Let's troubleshoot these 5 bullet points that I think could be challenging or troublesome," you know? Yeah, someone to challenge you back, I think, is really important because, again, if you only have enablers around you,
Just
it
a
just
yes man.
yeah, it does it's a disservice. It really is. Like, it's
Mhm.
important to have people contradict you a little bit, and it might be a huge motivator for you. If you have someone who's, like, no way. That's never going to work. And you are so confident, then follow your gut. Like prove them wrong. Say, actually, I know this is going to be a great idea. And watch me. It might not happen in the first year. It might not happen in the second year, but um, goes back to consistency. I think that's like the cure for SOSers.
Yeah. And maybe it's finding someone that you kind of, I mean, I guess you could go either way. Finding someone that like knows you a little bit to
Mhm.
kind of reel you in. Or maybe sometimes it's good to like meet somebody new, but it just has that personality of like asking questions and be like, is that a good idea right now?
Right.
Versus, yeah, someone who's just like, that sounds great. Love it. Like you should totally do it. And then you have a million ideas on your list that are never going to get done.
Bless us. So, okay, what do you think are some valuable tips for better concentration overall? Whether it be like, what have you tried or what have you even maybe heard of from supplements to apps to anything?
Yeah. I think for me, I go in phases of it of like really trying to time block. And I even recently like set up all of these things in my calendar, which have now started to kind of annoy me because if I don't follow them, my phone's like dinging me and I'm like, wait, do I have a meeting? What's going on? And some of it was like, morning solo time or like a lunch break. And like every day is just so different that like the consistency of taking lunch from 1 to 2 every day just isn't a reality for me. Um, but so I was like, okay, I'm going to try to block it out on my actual calendar to see if I'll stick to it. That didn't really work. And so I think it's kind of like, for me, a week by week thing, right? Like doing a time block of like, what do I need to get
Mhm.
done this week? What are my meetings, my days? And that really helps me to concentrate more so that I can be like, okay, I'm going to spend the next hour updating this client's like information timeline, talking to their vendors, because I am somebody who multitask and like goes
Mhm.
back and forth. I'm like, oh, I got an email and then I respond to that and it's like for something totally different. And so time blocking for me has helped because I don't concentrate very well. Like I'm
Mhm.
very much like, oh, what's on Instagram or like what's happening with the presidential election,
Yeah.
And so
You have your notifications turned off for everything?
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, the only like notifications I have are like text messages and calls. So years ago, I turned off email notifications,
Mhm.
Instagram, and it's like that's been amazing. And I would recommend it to everybody.
I think it's literally the first step for anybody to do
Yeah.
it.
I'm just like, I didn't need to get a notification for every single email. Like I'm checking email all the time, all like most days anyway. And I was just like, nothing is really that urgent for me.
Agreed.
Um, Nor is Gabby's like on my photo. Like I just don't appreciate it, but I don't need to know in the moment when someone liked
Right.
it, right? And so yeah, I think time blocking has kind of been my biggest thing, but I'm definitely like a week by week time blocker
Mhm.
versus like let's set up my weeks for the next month and a half and I'll take lunch every day at 1 and like that's just not realistic for how I operate right now.
I love that idea of, like, always taking lunch at 1 and making that your time, but I think you're to your point, it's just not realistic with how we have to do site tours sometimes,
Mhm.
and people are different time zones, and so calls have to happen at different hours.
Right, like a new meeting pops up, right? Like a client
Yeah.
might be like, "Hey, can we have a meeting next week?" And the only time they can do it is from 1 to 2, right? And so I think when you're in a more corporate setting, it works to be like,
Mhm.
"Yeah, I'm going to take lunch every day from 12 to 1 or whatever it is." But I think because we're kind of out and about and our weeks look so different, it's just not realistic to time block a month ahead.
Mhm.
But it definitely helps me to concentrate more even if for deep work, right? If I'm like, okay, this next hour, if I'm like, I've been crazy all week, I'm going to be like, okay, today from noon to 1, I'm going to work on just this client and then like set a timer and solely focus on that. That's also really helpful for me.
Yeah. Something that I wanna try doing I guess this last half of the year, but, um, is time blocking for certain clients so that I can calculate how many hours I'm working on them. That's
Mm,
something that's like, that's data that I wish I had, but because
yep.
we are multitaskers, which by the way, I think in a previous years, being a multitasker was always seen as such a positive thing, but I don't know that it's super helpful to anybody unless you're talking about like, hey, I can throw a load of laundry in and then, rock the baby and take a call at the same time and you can concentrate on all that. But if we're talking about multitasking in the sense of like I have 18 tabs open on my Google Chrome, like that's not helpful so that is not always a positive. Um, but yeah, time blocking in the sense, do you ever do that just so you can calculate how many hours you spend on a certain client?
I have wanted to, and I've tried in the past, and I'm definitely the person who's like bouncing back and forth. And so, yeah, it's something I wish I could do better because I feel like a lot of people talk about it and how it's very important, especially for like what you're charging. But I've never been
Yeah,
great at it. So
that's a future goal for us
yeah,
then.
future goal.
I was gonna say too, when you are in deep work, like you say, do you listen to anything or do you have to be in complete silence or do music with no lyrics?
I have to do, yeah, typically music with no lyrics. There are some days where I'm like, I'm just been working at this computer for hours with like no nothing, like no sound around me. Typically I will go to YouTube and I often, because it's so calming to me, I type in like jazz rainy
Oh.
cafe. And so there's like rain sounds. You can like hear the doorbell like
Oh,
opening. It's
love
very
that.
soothing, but I almost need music, depending on what I'm doing, I need music without lyrics because I just think like the lyrics get distracting to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, words.
Yeah.
Like, I can't listen to a podcast while I'm doing
No.
work.
Same. Otherwise, I'm like listening, like the podcast is just playing. I'm like, I have no idea what they said.
Right.
Same for like TV. Like I know a
Mhm.
lot of photographers always post about how they have like a show on in the background. Like if I'm editing photos for someone, then I can do that because I'm not like having to read and think about stuff. But
Right.
the majority of the day, I just need like calming music just to
Yeah.
keep me peaceful. Yeah.
Yeah.
What
Have you
about
ever heard
you?
of Yeah, I was gonna say, have you heard of binaural beats? You ever
No.
heard Okay, so I do Spotify for all my music and podcasts, but there are playlists, binaural beats, and I guess if I understand correctly, they are kinda sounds it's a lot of, like, gongs and like, I don't know how else to describe, like
Okay. Like a sound bath.
kind of, yeah, kinda like a sound bath, and they have different frequencies for different things. So, like, if you need a focus one, you click on the focus one and it'll be like certain decibels or something like that. Um, and then, or hertz. What are like, I don't even know. I don't even know what audio
Yeah,
thing,
hurts?
hertz,
Uh,
maybe.
yeah, I think
We need to
so.
have someone on the podcast to
I know.
explain this better. But I think it's fascinating because if you want like energizing, you would do binaural beats for something else. If you want sleep binaural beats, you would have it for something else. But anyway, look it up. It's like Binauraal, binaural beats. Yeah.
Okay.
But I've been doing that. I put my headphones in so like I have
Yeah.
noise canceling from the outside and I just have these binaural beats on and
Is it
I'm in
helpful?
yeah, I just find
Yeah.
it like again, there's no lyrics, so I'm just in this zone of meditation, but
Gongs
also
and
yeah, and just going through all my emails one at a time, and I did this last night, and I, like, crushed half my inbox, and I got through a lot of stuff. On the flip side, and I don't know if this has to do with, like, severe case of shiny object syndrome or ADHD or something like that, but if I get interrupted in my
Mm.
flow,
Mhm.
I'm I'm nasty. Like, poor Chris, my husband, I have yelled at him so many times, but it takes me out of my concentration flow, and it is so hard for me to get back into it. Have you ever had that happen? I mean, surely you've been
Yeah.
interrupted.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, my husband and I used to like share our office. And so there was a couple of times where I was like, we learned to be like, hey, do you have a second? And so, because sometimes he would like start asking a question, we would just start talking. And then I was like, I'm busy. Like
Yeah.
I needed to like finish, the email or like you lose your train of thought, which I have seen. It would be great to bring someone on the podcast about this, but I have seen that it's like it is like it takes a long time. Like once you are kind of pulled out of a flow state, it takes a long time to like get back to what you were doing and like regain your train of thought. And so yeah, I think it is
Mm.
like detrimental, especially having so many tabs open. They're like, it's not helpful to like even just have the vision of like, I have 20 tabs open.
Mhm.
Um, because I'm very much the person like when I restart my computer, it's like, would you like to restore all your tabs? And I'm like, yes, please. Even though I know it's not good.
Your computer's like, "You shouldn't,
Yeah.
but do
It's like you're
you want."
slowing me down. That's probably why the internet wasn't working this morning.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, like it is harder to get our concentration back these days. We're pulled in so many directions. But I think to your point, like, okay, turning off notifications, possibly reducing the tabs. If you do not have to have those tabs open, like save the website somewhere, come back to it later, make yourself a note. My other thing too is I was saying that this was old age, but I think it's also just my capacity with this concentration. I need to make sure I get everything out of my head onto paper or a voice note on my phone or something. It for a few reasons, but one of like mainly it clears up that mental space for me and I don't feel like I'm forgetting something. Like at the end of the day sometimes I'll think to myself, "Oh my gosh, did I forget? I've been." I always think I'm going to remember, but I never do.
Oh, never. Yes.
So getting it on off on paper, getting out of your brain and coming it back. Maybe you have a master checklist, that you just chip away every day, but that's helped too.
I use a checklist through my Honeybook app for like client projects, but then I've also purchased a like paper like calendar, like a what do you call it? A
Like a
journal? No, not
planner.
planner. Yeah, I was like not a journal. And I love it because I love to write stuff down and I love to
Mhm.
physically cross stuff off.
Yes.
Granted, some weeks I'm transferring my to-do list from week to
Oh,
week, but it just like is so much better, like for me to be able to write it down versus just typing it on my to-do list.
yeah.
And granted, I have the two lists, and I think there's just maybe certain tasks that I feel like I need to write this down and get it off my mind.
Yeah.
Way more helpful. Gabby, would you say what are some final tips that you would like to share with fellow SOSers or maybe that you can band together to combat shiny object syndrome?
I was gonna say, people come reach out to me and tell me you're a fellow
Form a
SOSer.
support group. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we need a support group where we sit and meditate in silence and try to concentrate. Well, that's another thing, right? I think meditation of any sort or physical activity is probably really good,
Mhm.
um, to release a little bit of that nervous energy of thinking and shiny object syndrome stuff all the time. I really think it is a lot of it's a lot of mental training. It's not going to go away in a day, but taking your tasks one at a time, or if you're an inbox person, that's kind of how I work. I look at my inbox and I go through one at a time the tasks that need to happen within that email. I really try to bring myself back when I've gone away, when I've opened up a few tabs because I just thought of the makeup product I needed to buy. Write it down, get it out of your mind, write it down, come back to it later. It's not urgent. Go through your work tasks. And then hopefully you'll have all this free time after and you can kind of brainstorm whatever else you need to have happen. And like Carrie mentioned earlier, allow yourself a brainstorm session, like have a dump. Like this is the chance to be creative for, whatever business ideas, new website names, new design stuff, photo shoot thoughts. Do a brain dump and allow your brain to go wild. I think that is completely safe, I would think, and encouraged probably. But yeah, I think it's good to balance it in both of those ways. What do you think? Final tips?
Yeah, I think creating even beyond that brain dump of like business ideas, right? If you're just like, for example, in my weekly planner, I'm just brain dumping a list of personal things that I have to do, whether it's like call the doctor or, purchase this thing on Amazon. Because even doing that sort of helps you recognize, okay, what is urgent? What do I need to do today versus like maybe I can buy that thing on Friday. And I think just kind of getting everything off your brain of a to-do list for the week sort of helps you lay that out better. So, yeah, I mean, I think overall, find a support buddy if you really, need just like someone to like talk through ideas with and figure out what feels realistic. Time block, take off notifications, really like figure out what works for you so you can feel like you can concentrate and do your work the best that you can.
And lastly, if it is deeper than this, like if it's not just shiny object syndrome, please seek professional help or a doctor to really evaluate you if you're
Yeah.
having or even this is what it is and you want to speak to somebody, please, reach out to them. We are not licensed in anything. In fact, I don't even have a wedding planning certificate. So let's just make
What?
that
No, I'm just kidding.
yeah. Ooh, a scandal for another day.
Exactly. Well, we appreciate you guys listening to our ramblings, and hopefully, if anything, other people can relate to kind of this SOS. And yeah, we would love to hear from people too, like comments. Feel free, to share with us kind of what you guys are struggling with, and again, find the support group. And you know what? I think being creative is amazing, and having these businesses, we just sometimes have to figure out how to reel it in and just like be gentle with ourselves and be, the most productive for us and what's best for ourselves and our businesses.
Agreed.
Love it. Well, thanks for joining us, Jabbers.
Bye, guys.